What happens when Hollywood's toughest legend walks straight into a room full of talk show hosts who think they can take him down? You're about to find out. And trust me, this is a collision no one saw coming. Clint Eastwood, the man whose stare has ended more standoffs than most people have lived through, stepped onto that stage expecting a simple interview. But the moment he sat across from Joy Behar, the air changed. What was supposed to be lighthearted banter turned into a live-on-air gunfight. No bullets, just words sharp enough to draw blood. The lights flared, the audience cheered, and Whoopi's warm voice carried across the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Clint Eastwood. The applause hit like thunder. Clint walked in slow and steady, his movements calm, almost deliberate, the kind that made people quiet down without realizing it. He wasn't rushing to charm anyone. His eyes scanned the room with that same cool, razor-sharp look he'd worn in 100 movies. He took his seat, thanked the host politely, and nodded to Whoopi, who smiled like everything was right on script. Everyone tried to keep the mood light. Whoopi kicked off with small talk about Clint's new movie. Sarah leaned in, genuinely curious, and even the audience seemed to hang on every word. Clint spoke softly but clearly, each sentence landing with the weight of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. It's about redemption, he said, about giving people a second chance even when the world's written them off. The crowd nodded, a few people even clapped softly. But off to the side, Joy sat back in her chair, her smile fixed but her eyes sharp. She hadn't said a word yet, but the look on her face said plenty. She was waiting, watching, measuring every line Clint said like a cat watching a mouse. Clint was in the middle of answering a question about truth and redemption, his voice steady, his words thoughtful. The crowd was calm, listening closely, until Joy leaned forward, her tone cutting through the air like a knife. Truth, huh, Clint? She said with that half smile that never reached her eyes. You talk a lot about it, but it's funny how you seem to support people who don't know a thing about integrity. The studio went dead silent. The laughter, the polite nods, even the background hum of the audience, gone in a second. Whoopi's smile froze. Sarah shifted awkwardly, and all eyes went to Clint. He didn't flinch. For a moment, he just looked at Joy, his jaw set, his hands still resting calmly on the armrests. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped low, rough like gravel, but clear enough that everyone in the room felt it. Careful with how you define truth, Joy, he said slowly, his gaze locked on hers. Sometimes it reflects more about the person saying it than the person it's aimed at. The line hung in the air, heavy, sharp, impossible to ignore. Joy blinked but didn't back down, her smirk faltering for just a second. The audience could feel it. Something had shifted. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was the first spark before the storm. Joy's tone sharpened like broken glass. So tell me, Clint, she said, leaning forward, her smile tight. When you support politicians who tear people apart, is that what you call redemption too? The air in the studio dropped 10 degrees. You could almost hear the hum of the lights overhead. Whoopi shifted in her seat. Sarah froze mid-smile, and the crowd, once warm and lively, fell silent. Clint didn't move. Not a blink, not a twitch. He just looked at her, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, the way a man does before pulling the trigger. Not out of anger, but precision. When he finally spoke, his voice came low, steady, and dangerous. Tell me something, Joy, he said. Are you asking me a question or passing judgment? The words hit like a slap wrapped in velvet. Joy's smirk faltered, but pride wouldn't let her stop. I'm doing my job, she snapped, her voice rising. I have every right to ask tough questions. Whoopi tried to cut in, her tone nervous. Maybe we should bring it back to the film. But Joy raised a hand sharply. Don't tell me to stop, Whoopi. I'm doing my job. Clint leaned back in his chair, a slow, cold smile forming on his face. Your job? He said quietly, every word deliberate. I thought your job was to interview people, not ambush them. The audience gasped, a quick collective breath that seemed to hang in the air. Even the camera operators froze. Clint didn't look away from her. If you want to fight, Joy, he added, voice barely above a whisper, you just picked one with the wrong man. Joy laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that didn't match her eyes. You really think you're better than everyone else, don't you, Clint? Sitting there all calm, talking about truth and redemption like you're some kind of saint. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Tell me, what makes you so different from the people you criticize? Clint didn't move an inch. He just looked at her. That slow, steady, unblinking stare that could strip paint off a wall. When he spoke, his tone was low and deliberate, the kind that made every word feel heavy. You want to know the difference, Joy? He said. I've spent 60 years telling stories that made people feel something. Hope, pain, courage. You've spent yours talking over people, pretending you're the smartest voice in the room. Joy scoffed. Oh, please, don't lecture me about art. You make movies, I make people laugh. Same business, different stage. Clint tilted his head slightly, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. You call that the same? He asked. I make films that stay with people long after the credits roll. You make clips that go viral for a week and vanish. I create. You provoke. I build. You tear down. You want to talk about truth, Joy? You wouldn't recognize it if it sat in that chair next to you. The room went still. Whoopi looked down. Sarah's hands twisted nervously in her lap. Joy's eyes flashed. At least I don't hide behind a script, she fired back. Everything I say comes from me. Clint chuckled, the sound dry and cold. Yeah, he said, that's the problem. No filter, no thought, just noise. Joy's smile vanished. You think I just make noise, she hissed. I connect with people. I make them laugh every single day. Clint leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Laughter, he said, or mockery. Because every time you laugh, it's at someone, not with them. You've mistaken cruelty for comedy and applause for respect. Joy's face flushed deep red. You think you can come on my show and insult me like that? Clint straightened slowly, his gaze never breaking. I don't need to insult you, Joy. You're doing that just fine yourself. The audience gasped, an audible, collective intake of breath. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Joy's lips trembled as she tried to form a comeback, but Clint's stare held her there. Still silent and exposed. Joy's voice cracked like a whip across the studio. This is my show, Clint. I ask the questions. You answer them. That's how this works. She was standing now, hand gripping the edge of the table so tight her knuckles went white. The audience stirred, caught between fascination and disbelief. Whoopi's nervous smile vanished. Sarah looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. Clint didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his hands clasped in front of him, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, controlled. The kind of quiet that made people lean in without realizing it. You keep saying it's your show, he said softly, but yelling it doesn't make it true. Respect isn't owned, Joy. It's earned. Joy snapped back, her voice trembling with anger. Don't turn this around on me, Clint. You think you can come on my set and talk down to me? I've been doing this for decades. I've built this show from the ground up. Clint's gaze hardened, his voice cutting through her words like a knife through glass. And yet, he said, the louder you talk, the smaller you sound. He leaned in slightly, his tone dropping to a deadly calm. You confuse control with respect. They're not the same thing. One is taken, the other is given. Joy's jaw tightened. You don't get to lecture me on respect, she shouted. You're just an actor, a man who hides behind lines written by someone else. Clint chuckled, a cold, humorless sound that made her flinch. That's the difference between us, he said. I may speak someone else's words, but at least I believe in them. You speak your own, and they still don't mean a damn thing. The crowd gasped. Joy's face twisted, her anger boiling over. You arrogant old man, she hissed. You think silence makes you powerful? It just makes you irrelevant. Clint's eyes narrowed, his tone razor sharp, but barely above a whisper. No, he said. Silence is power when it's filled with truth. The loudest person in the room is usually the one who's already lost the argument. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, his presence suddenly towering over the chaos around him. "It's sad, Joy," he continued, his eyes locked on hers. "Your power ends where the cameras stop rolling. Mine begins when the lights go out." Joy froze, speechless, her breath coming in short, angry bursts. The audience didn't dare move. The air between them felt electric, like the final seconds before a storm breaks. And for one chilling heartbeat, it was clear to everyone watching. Clint Eastwood hadn't just won the argument. He'd ended it. Joy's face twisted in rage, her voice breaking into a shout. "You're nothing but a washed-up has-been, Clint. You think you're still relevant? Newsflash. The world's moved on. Nobody cares about your old cowboy movies anymore." Her words sliced through the air like broken glass. The crowd gasped. Whoopi's eyes widened in shock, and Sarah froze, clutching her cue cards like a shield. Even the crew behind the cameras stopped moving. Clint stood slowly, every motion deliberate, calm, almost eerily calm. The silence that followed made the sound of his chair scraping the floor echo like thunder. When he spoke, his voice was low, deep, and terrifyingly steady. "You might be right, Joy," he said. "Maybe I'm a man past my prime." He took a slow step forward, his gaze locked on her trembling face. "But at least I had a prime. At least I was someone. I created, I built, I inspired." "What have you done, Joy?" His tone hardened. "You've spent your life sitting in that chair, mocking people braver than you'll ever be. You make a living off other people's courage because you don't have any of your own." Joy's nostrils flared as she fired back, her voice cracking. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I've earned my place here. People tune in to watch me. They listen to my opinions." Clint's expression didn't change. "Oh, they tune in," he said coldly, "but not to listen. They watch to see who you'll tear down next. You mistake attention for respect, Joy. They're not clapping for you. They're clapping at you," the audience murmured in shock. Even Joy's co-host looked stunned. Her voice shook as she tried to hold her ground. "At least I'm still here, Clint. Still relevant. Still being talked about." Clint leaned in, his tone dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. "Yes, people talk about you. The same way they talk about a car crash. Loud, messy, and impossible to look at without feeling sorry." Joy's mouth fell open, her confidence cracking completely. "You arrogant old man," she spat, her voice trembling. "You think you can just walk in here and humiliate me?" Clint smiled faintly, not cruel but knowing. "No, Joy," he said. "You did that all by yourself. I just gave you the mirror." He stepped closer, his voice now a dark whisper. "You know what the real fear is? It's not being forgotten. It's being remembered for the wrong reasons. And you, Joy, you've made a career out of giving people reasons to forget why they ever respected you." Joy's eyes glistened. Her lips trembled, searching for a comeback that wouldn't come. The audience was dead silent, not even a breath. Clint straightened his jacket, turned slightly toward the crowd, and delivered the final blow. "You call me a has-been," he said quietly, "but even my shadows have done more than your spotlight ever will." Joy froze, pale and shaking. And for the first time in her own studio, she wasn't the one holding the power. She was the one standing in its shadow. Clint reached up and calmly unclipped his microphone. The soft click of metal against fabric echoed louder than any word that had come before it. He stood tall, shoulders straight, and turned toward the main camera. The studio lights glared down, but his expression was calm, carved in stone. When he spoke, his voice was steady, deep, and filled with quiet conviction. "The audience," he said, eyes fixed on the lens, "deserves the truth, not cheap theater. And today," he paused, letting the silence stretch, "they saw exactly who's acting." No one dared to breathe. The producers stood frozen behind the cameras. Joy's face was drained of color, her hands trembling as she tried to hold on to what little pride she had left. Clint placed the mic gently on the table, the gesture somehow heavier than a slam. Then he turned, his boots hitting the studio floor. One step, two steps, each one echoing like a gavel striking wood. It wasn't just a walkout, it was a verdict being delivered. The studio was dead quiet. The audience didn't applaud, didn't whisper. They just watched him go. The man who'd once tamed outlaws on screen had just tamed a storm on live television. Joy stood frozen under the hot lights, her eyes darting toward the exit, as if hoping someone would save her from the silence. No one moved. As Clint disappeared beyond the studio doors, the lights seemed to dim, leaving Joy alone in the glare. Her lips parted, but no words came. The red recording light blinked off, and for the first time all morning, there was nothing. No laughter, no applause, no noise. Just the hollow ring of truth still hanging in the air. And as the camera faded out, the narrator's voice cut in softly, almost poetic in its calm. It was a showdown without bullets. But in the end, someone still fell. If that showdown left you breathless, don't go anywhere. There's plenty more where that came from. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment below. Do you think Joy Behar finally met her match? Share this video with someone who loves a good dose of truth served cold, and stay tuned, because the next story might be even more explosive.